Our Father and our God, we are so thankful for the privilege of being able to talk to brothers and sisters around the world through these social media platforms, different media outreaches. And we thank you for giving us this opportunity tonight to gather around this subject of the battle of the ages. And as we consider the matter of Protestantism, the mindsets, the blessings, the principles, the doctrines, the traditions, yes, indeed, the lifestyle which was recovered at that time. And sadly, Lord, we find that the same is not true now, as the church has gone a-whoring, apostatized, fallen away from the faith. We're praying that as we go through this historical overview of the greatest move of God outside of the Bible, the dear Master, you will rekindle in us a zeal, flames of fire, that there will be a restoration in understanding, a restoration in doctrine, a restoration in churchmanship, and yes, renewed zeal for world evangelism and world outreach. Cause that this vessel of clay, this cracked pot, this unprofitable servant, this worm at best, would be used in your hands to bring truth to your people, to bring knowledge to your people, to bring a stirring to your people. But cause also, dear Lord, that those that are on the other side of this camera will be benefited, will be profited, will be challenged, will be inspired, will be reinvigorated, revitalized, and caused to love the Lord more, to love the faith more, to commit and recommit, even in greater ways, for the glory of your name, the rejoicing of your people, the advancement of your kingdom. We pray these things only through the merit and in the wonderful name of your holy child, Jesus Christ. And all of God's people said, praise the Lord. Now we are confronted with the subject that I struggled to name. In a number of ways, I couldn't come up with a title for these lectures. I thought I should call it Deliverance from Tyranny, because that is what the Protestant Reformation was all about. And I thought that would be narrow, because then that would focus on an event, on a period of church history, but then we would not have the benefit of the context, the larger framework in which such a movement of God was conducted. And so I thought then that the proper title, and perhaps it is not proper as much as it is all encapsulating, would be the battle of the ages. Because I hope to convince you in my second address to you tomorrow, hopefully, and in the third address to you the day after tomorrow, which should be a Friday, that Protestant Reformation that happened about 500 and so years ago, from the beginning of the 16th century right to the end of that century, and some would argue pouring on to the 17th and 18th century, the results of which and the effects of which we continue to experience even to date. That you cannot understand that mighty move of God, that cataclysmic period in the history of the church, away from the age-long battle that has been going on between what I'm calling the seed of God and the seed of the evil one. The seed of God and the seed of the evil one. you could put that differently, that there has been an ongoing battle between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Satan. There's not been a time in the history of the church where such a battle has let up. It's been ongoing. It's been sustained. It's been perpetual. It's been unrelenting and unyielding and unceasing in many ways and in many places and throughout the ages. And so I thought for us to understand the Protestant Reformation, we've got to put it within its historical context, and that context is really the history of humanity. That is, from the creation of the first man, Adam, to the very time in which we live today. And I suspect and I think it will pour into the future that is coming. This is so vital. This is so important. I want to say something else, even as we continue to contemplate this matter. I want to say something else. And the next thing that I want to say is something that I captured while we were going to the Lord in prayer. And that is that I think this is the majority report within the professing church, particularly of the Protestant kind, that outside of the Bible, outside of the Holy Scriptures, outside of the sacred record, there has never been a greater move of God than that which happened during the Protestant Reformation. Now, there is a good number of you who are watching this from wherever you're watching and by whatever media you're watching this, that will be saying, why are we making a big deal out of such a matter that you yourself may have not heard about, you're not familiar with? And I say to you that you're not alone. In fact, you're not in the minority in that kind of thinking. Now, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you that the vast majority of the professing church, particularly the evangelical church, and in a broader sense, the Protestant church, the vast majority of them are either totally ignorant of the Protestant Reformation and the rich, consequential history that arises from the Protestant Reformation, and the few that you would find possessing that knowledge would have very scanty knowledge beyond this distinction between Roman Catholicism and Protestantism, because indeed within Christendom it can largely be said that those are the two broad categories: Roman Catholicism and Protestantism. I find that in my lectures at Wisdom Training Center, School of Ministry and Theology, usually when I admit students into any academic discipline, I tend to ask them the question, are you Protestant or are you Catholic? Now, it is a common practice that many of those pastors, many of those church leaders who come through Wisdom Training Center, School of Ministry and Theology, are those that would identify themselves readily not only as Protestants, but as those that are against Roman Catholicism. And that's interesting. That's absolutely interesting. It's interesting because as we begin to prod them, what is the basis, what is the foundation upon which they would consider themselves Protestants as opposed to Roman Catholics? Now I'm talking about pastors and so-called bishops and church leaders of charismatic, Pentecostal, Anglican, sometimes even Baptist backgrounds, even Presbyterian. These are all Protestant groups and African indigenous groups, leaders in those churches. And when you begin to sort of investigate, to ask them, what is Protestantism? What does it stand for? What is that history all about? Few of them can cogently and very effectively tell you what that is all about. And I think that is sad. I think that is very sad. Now, in my second address to you, I will tell you 5 or 6 reasons why I think that state of affairs is absolutely tragic. It is absolutely dangerous. Now, I'm going to say something else as we move forward. I have said, number 1, that outside of the Bible, there is no greater move of God. And I dare say, few would even come close to that which happened in the 16th century, that which resulted in a splinter, a breakaway from Roman Catholicism, Protestantism as we know it. But I've said in the second place that what we find within the professing evangelical church, within the professing Protestant wing of Christianity, you find a lot of ignorance and disinterest in a subject that practically defines who we are, explains who we are, gives reason to who we are. Our brother, responding to an advertisement we're making on Facebook, did tell me that he thinks we shouldn't use the word Protestantism is under siege, because in his opinion, and I think he's right to a very great extent, there is not much of Protestantism. There is not much of Protestantism, because, ladies and gentlemen, the very word Protestantism comes from the word protest. In other words, it is a wing of Christianity that is defined by a protestation. And that protestation is also defined by certain principles, certain doctrines, certain proclivities, certain persuasions that are key to whoever will call themselves Protestants. Now, I was going to say something else. The Protestant Reformation wasn't just significant to the extent that it caused a split between Roman Catholicism and the resultant Protestantism. That is not the only issue. That is not the only thing. There was more to it. I say to you that much history, even secular history, would reckon and agree that the Protestant Reformation had effect, far-reaching effect, not just to the Christian church, but to civilizations across the world, particularly in Europe itself, as we know it. And of course, from Europe to the very Americas itself, as we should see. This was mighty. This was consequential. This was a really, really influential move of God. So now, I got to say, why then have we chosen to tackle this subject in a series of 9 lectures spanning 3 weeks? That would be Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, starting today, tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday, and then next week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then the week after that, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We're going to be dealing with this. Why have we chosen to do this? 1, we want to deal with the ignorance there is there. But as WTC, as Wisdom Training Center School of Ministry and Theology, particularly this online outreach, we try to come up with short courses, short, practical, and pointed courses that are aimed at addressing a particular problem. You could call it a malady. You could call it a deficiency within the professing church. Now, obviously, in the last few months, we've dealt with returning to biblical evangelism. We had, I think, 3 weeks there where we dealt with the fundamental issues that have to be involved with evangelism. Before that, we had dealt with the School of Preaching, where we did 6 weeks of the School of Preaching. These are specialized courses that address a particular problem where we think the church has been attacked by either a tide of error and heresy or false doctrine or just false churchmanship or just misunderstanding and so on and so forth. But we also dealt with a series that we called The New Birth, where we had 6 lectures dealing particularly with the new birth. Now we think that the Protestant Reformation is such a pivotal, such a central point in the history of the church that to fail to apprehend this history is in fact to miss the movement of God in the history of the world. And to miss that movement of God then predisposes us, exposes us to a lot of fakes that have come to the church today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're saying then, and I've written a book, not published yet, it's called Children of Rome. And in my book, Children of Rome, I'm arguing that what we call Protestantism, particularly charismaticism and Pentecostalism, is really Roman Catholicism baptized by another name. That is how serious this matter is. Now, most of the students that come through Wisdom Training Center School of Ministry and Theology will vigorously object, and they will say, we are far from Romanism. We are far from Roman Catholicism. In fact, they will take not just an antithetical, but even an adversarial position vis-a-vis Roman Catholicism. But as we begin to talk to them, the belief they espouse, the structures within their churches, the responses they have to issues biblical, it begins to emerge, it begins to come up, that in fact our friends are Roman Catholics just by another name. Now my friend and one of my mentors, Billy Sked, talked about Pentecostalism as Roman Catholicism on steroids. Roman Catholicism on steroids. I think what he meant there, Billy Sked, he meant, was that whereas in charismatic, Pentecostal, word of faith, African traditional churches will distance themselves from the Church of Rome, because the Church of Rome is very orderly, very slow, very methodical, very decent, very organized, that kind of stuff. On the other side, you will find the same doctrines, the same ideas, the same sort of mindsets, only given hype, only done loudly and more chaotically. And I know I'm being a little hard there. But it's closer to the truth than we would care to admit. So brothers and sisters, we want to bring back biblical doctrine as was captured during the Protestant Reformation. This is absolutely critical. Now I'm going to read you something from one of the books that I'm going to recommend to you. One of the books I'm going to recommend to you shortly, actually, is written by Peter Hammond. It's called The Greatest Century of Reformation. The Greatest Century of Reformation by Peter Hammond. I hope you can get that correctly. The Greatest Century of Reformation by Peter Hammond. And Peter Hammond, in the foreword to this book, actually, not Peter Hammond, by the way, it is somebody called Reverend Mike O'Donovan doing a kind of a recommendation or a foreword to this work, writes the following, and I'm reading them in your hearing. It says, the Great Reformation of the 16th century was a historical watershed that involved an astounding return to biblical faith that reset the foundations of an ascendant Western civilization, that demonstrated the power of godly order in society. The signature of God that was unmistakable in Western culture must be recovered in our day of declension by means of a new and more comprehensive reformation, wherein we will see the revival of biblical faith to the glory of God, says Mr. Mike O'Donovan in this book. So if we hope then to recover the purity of the Christian faith, the authenticity of the Christian religion, the power of the gospel and the truthfulness of the gospel, then in that book we are told, and I agree, that we must retrace this history and recover those doctrines that were lost back in the day. Otherwise, we will find ourselves to be children of Rome, just baptized by another name. This is critical. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take some time now. To sort of run you through the structure of what we're going to do in the next 3 weeks. 9 lectures, 3 weeks. This course, The Battle of the Ages, Protestantism Under Siege, I have divided it in 3 big blocks. Some of you now are familiar that I like to do that. That is for your benefit as well as my benefit. It's for your benefit because you can anticipate what you're going to deal with. But I'm also able to follow a definite structure so that tomorrow you will know what I'm going to deal with and you will mentally prepare accordingly. So this is why I do this kind of clear structure and detailed pattern as regarding what I will be doing. So I've divided this in 3 broad categories, 3 broad areas. Let's call them parts. Part 1, I'm going to deal with the battle in context. The battle in context. That's going to be part 1. The battle in context. We are talking about the battle of the ages, aren't we? Protestantism is under siege. We are engaged in the battle. So we want in part 1, which will be this week, the first week, we want to set this battle in its proper historical context. Now there's going to be 4 lectures then under that. The first is what you're experiencing now. Introduction to this course, all right? Introduction to this course. This is what you're experiencing now. That is the first lecture under part 1, the battle in context. But then the second lecture in this sort of part here, this block, the second lecture will be why we must study the history of the Reformation, why we must study the history of the Protestant Reformation. That's tomorrow. I'm going to be dealing with that subject. Why we must study the history of the Protestant Reformation. Why we must study this history of the Protestant Reformation. We're going to be dealing with that tomorrow. Then the third lecture, which will come to you on Friday. On Friday, the third lecture on Friday. We're going to be dealing with a lecture that I'm calling A Binary Struggle, the Faith of the Saints. A binary struggle, the faith of the saints. A two-pronged struggle, a two-sided struggle. That is what binary means. All right? So I'm going to trace in the biblical record and in the record of church history that there's always been this battle between the seed of God and the seed of the evil one. And I'm going to convince you then that this battle came to a head, climaxed, crescendoed at the Protestant Reformation. There has been times in the history of the church where that battle has sort of erupted like a volcanic eruption in the history of the church. There's always undercurrents going on. There's always that magma forming within the crust of the earth. Those lava forming and heating up. And then in some times through the history of the church, you find those fissures through which that volcanic eruption comes up. And one of the greatest volcanic activities in the history of the church, as I should tell you, is in the 16th century, the Protestant Reformation. So that will be the third lecture, a binary struggle, the faith of the saints, a defense of the faith, a fight for the faith. In the fourth place, under that block 1, we're going to deal with a lecture that I will be calling Gathering Storms. Gathering Storms. Gathering Storms. You know that when it's about to rain, the storms gather, don't they? And the clouds look ominous. And there could be even lightning striking the skies. And we're using that analogy here to say there were things that happened prior to the Reformation, some corruption within Roman Catholicism that happened, that led us, that made the Reformation necessary. And I should convince you then that in fact those situations are true today. And we will be asking a question that Michael Reeves, in his book, which I will recommend to you, in the very last chapter, I think, which is chapter 7, is titling that chapter by asking a question: do we need a reformation? Do we need a reformation? Is what Michael Reeves in this book, I will recommend it, don't worry, will be asking. And we will be trying to say then that we need a reformation today. Another protestation ought to be happening today. So that will close block 1 of our lectures together. All right, I hope you're still with me there. That will close block 1. Gathering storms, the stage is set for a protest. Then we're going to enter in week 2, in part 2 of our presentations. Now, part 2 has 3 lectures. Now, part 2, I'm calling it by a Latin expression. Now, forgive the expression, but it will come clear. It will become clear as we'll explain it. It was a very famous expression. In fact, I think in Geneva, Switzerland, they still have what they're calling a Reformation wall. In Geneva, Switzerland. Now, as I should tell you, this is where John Calvin, one of the great reformers, did a lot of his work there. They have this wall in Geneva, and the wall has these inscriptions, these writings: post tenebros lux. Post tenebros lux. That is Latin, which simply means after the darkness, light. After the darkness, light. So we are titling the second block of our presentations. This second part of our presentation, we have simply titled it Post Tenebros Lux. That is, after darkness, light. And there are 3 lectures beneath that block. Which lecture number 5 then? Number 1 in this second, but number 5 if you consider from block 1. The first lecture is going to be titled, rather the 5th lecture is going to be titled God's Point Man. God's Point Man. The story of Martin Luther. And I'm going to tell the story of that German reformer, because it is him that God used to bring this wonderful awakening to the Church of God and to bring this deliverance from the tyranny and the dictatorship of the monolithic Roman Catholicism. So we're going to be dealing with that then. God's Point Man, the story of Martin Luther. Then lecture 6. This is week 2, lecture 6, under part 2. We're going to be dealing with principles of the Protestant Reformation. Principles of the Protestant Reformation. What great ideas came out of that period? What defines us? And because these principles of necessity are the ones then that define what Protestantism is all about. So we're going to be dealing then with the principles of the Protestant Reformation. Primarily, those 2 great principles, what we sometimes call the formal principle of the Reformation and the material principle of the Reformation. They are wonderful things. Don't let those big words scare you. They are simple ideas, but we're going to be dealing with them as God gives us the grace. Then lecture 7. Lecture 7 is going to be titled Freedom and Joy. Freedom and Joy. Freedom and Joy. And here we're going to be looking at the emancipation that came from the Protestant Reformation. The principle that came out gave rise to some liberties. The great doctrines of the Reformation, the great minds of the Reformation in lecture 6 gave rise to some liberties which we will deal with in lecture 7. We're dealing with the priesthood of all believers. We'll be dealing with the right to private judgment. We'll be dealing with the simplicity in worship, that worship need not be so complicated, and so on and so forth. So we're going to be dealing with freedom and joy, and we're calling that the petals of the protestation. The petals of the protestation. Like a flower, the petals came out of that, and we will be looking at that and rejoicing in that which God has done. And then that will complete week number 2. And it will launch us in week number 3. It will launch us in week number 3. And in week number 3 then, we will take up the 3rd and final part of our presentations. The 3rd and final block of our presentations. And there, we're going to title again, that part, by a Latin expression, and don't let it scare you, don't let it scare you. The Latin expression is simply this, semper reformanda, which simply means always reforming, always reforming, always reforming, semper reformanda, always reforming. Now that is the third part of our presentation, and we will have 3 lectures there. We will have 3 lectures there. Under semper reformanda, always reforming, we will have 3 lectures under that title. Lecture 1 is going to, which is lecture 8 by then, will be Progress of the Reform. Progress of the Reform, the onward march of Protestantism from the little place called Wittenberg in Germany, all the way to Strasbourg, all the way to Augsburg, all the way to the other places in Germany, and then branching out further northwards, I think, to Switzerland and to Geneva, then to Holland, then to England, and so on and so forth, up to where it has its effects on the African continent and many other places. So we're going to be dealing with progress of the Reformation and the great things that God did around that time. That will bring us then to the second last lecture, which will be lecture 9. Lecture 9. We're calling it Declension and Counter-Reformation. Declension and Counter-Reformation. Declension and Counter-Reformation. Declension and Counter-Reformation. What we'll be saying principally here is that as God moved in tremendous ways to liberate his church from tyranny of false religion and false worship and false doctrines, the enemy of the church, the enemy of the souls of men, the enemy of the gospel, the enemy of Christ was also at work trying to impede the onward march of that protestation. And that onslaught, that huge blitzkrieg of the counter-reformation, of the impeding of the gospel progress, was principally led by that monolithic institution, by that tyrannical institution that is called the Church of Rome or Roman Catholicism. But as I should tell you, that the Church of Rome succeeded to spread its tentacles to other branches of Christian thought, so that in fact even those that call themselves Protestants have found themselves on the opposing end of Protestantism, and so they've been involved, as it were, in the counter-reformation that has been happening for some time. Now then, after we do that, we're going to do our last lecture, lecture number 10. Lecture number 10 is going to be titled Children of Rome. Children, title of my book, which I have written but yet to be published, Children of Rome. And what we're principally saying is that as we survey the church scene today, as we look around us and try to look at what passes for the church, we can in fact begin to discern Roman Catholicism in the things we do, in the belief systems we have, in our music, in our worship, in our leadership structures. And therefore, I'm going to argue that we are returning to Rome, yet baptizing ourselves by other names. Now, that's basically the structure. So you see there are 3 parts. Under those 3 parts, there will be 10 lectures. The first one is what you are partaking of right now. So I thought we should declare that structure right from the beginning so that all of us are on the same page. All of us are on the same page. Again, I plead with you, invite somebody who needs to know something about Protestantism, about that history. And it's not just going to be the history of the Protestantism. I'm going to deal with the history of the church as a whole, right from Genesis chapter 3 all the way to the period where we are in, and God willing, we're going to make some projections where we think the Christian church will be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years from now, because to be forewarned is indeed to be forearmed. To be forewarned is indeed to be forearmed. So I hope you spread the word. I hope you host watch parties. I hope you share these videos. I hope you join our YouTube channel and you come to us in correspondence through the numbers that are scrolling at the bottom of your screen right now. There is one more thing that we are left to do before we close this lecture tonight. One more thing then. And the thing that I have to do now is to recommend some books to you. I want to recommend some resources. Now, you don't have to buy all of these things because I'm going to recommend quite a number of them. I'm going to recommend many books, many books. But I want to just run them by you. And the reason I'm going to run them by you is because I want you to know where you might go. If you want more information, if you want more knowledge, you can buy one, you can buy two, you can buy all of them if you like, or if you are able to. But I want you to at least have that knowledge with you so that you can use it whenever you feel you want to use it. Now, I'm going to put a screen right next to me here, and so that you might be able to follow. I think that's it there. I think on your screen I will be appearing on a very small insert there, and then the recommended resources. There you have them. Can you see that? And by the way, even as I do that, I think I might do you one better. At the end, after I'm done with this, I'm going to have a scrolling text so that those books again will be scrolling. So if you're not able to see that side screen, which has the Word document, recommended resources, don't you worry about it. I'm going to be scrolling those at the bottom of this screen. This streaming gadget we have allows us to do that, and we are so thankful. So let us get into it then. I hope you're able to see those two screens. One has me still talking, and the other has the list of books that I am recommending. The first there is Historical Theology by a man called William Cunningham. And I have that title here. Sadly, people borrow these things and they do not return them in good time. And yeah, so that is it. But you can write that down so you can find it if you can. Historical Theology by William Cunningham. Now, I need to say something about that. That is a reading that is a bit on the harder end. And I'm just going to mention that so that those of you who are not very apt to voluminous readings can actually make decisions accordingly. I'm going to make comments on these books so that you can make your judgment and make your purchases wisely. So William Cunningham, Historical Theology, as well as another one that I'm going to recommend, and maybe I should just recommend it immediately. Right at the bottom there, you'll see another one. Can you see that I'm going to highlight it? There you go. There you go. That one there, The Reformers and the Theology of the Reformation, again is by William Cunningham. The Reformers and the Theology of the Reformation, again is by William Cunningham. So Historical Theology at the top there. All right. Historical Theology at the top by William Cunningham, as well as The Reformers and the Theology of the Reformation down here, again by William Cunningham. I say those are voluminous. For example, The Reformers and the Theology of the Reformation is this one over here. The one that I have, which is by the Banner of Truth Trust, publication of the Banner of Truth Trust, has about 600, let me just see, okay, about 610 pages. All right, so that's quite voluminous, and some of us are not very keen on undertaking such very voluminous readings. So just to warn you then that both of those books are voluminous, and as well I think his English isn't the easiest. He does tend to use the old kind of English, and so unless you are confident and comfortable in that kind of English, for example, instead of using the word the Pope of Rome or the papacy of Rome, he will say the papal see, S-E-E, see meaning the throne. All right, so that's old English. Cunningham uses words like that, and so just to warn you then that they are excellent, absolutely wonderful books. If you get those, my dear brother and sister, you will have done yourself a huge service. Huge service. But I warn you, you've got to have the patience as well as the, I guess I should say, mental stamina to keep up with them. But then you have the Reformers and the Theology of the Reformation, Historical Theology by William Cunningham, and those are going to be profitable reads for you. But then in the second place, you have that book there. I hope you can see it. Number 2 in my recommendations there is 2,000 Years of Christ's Power. 2,000 Years of Christ's Power. Again, those are a bit voluminous books, so if you're not the kind that does well with voluminous books, I guess you want to use that for reference, but I'll recommend smaller books to you that are going to be very easy to read. 2,000 Years of Christ's Power. There is part 1. It's by N.R. Needham. N.R. Needham. All right, 2,000 Years of Christ's Power. He takes a broad sweep of church history. All right, the age of the early fathers, that's part 1. And then part 2, the Middle Ages. And then you've got part 3, the Renaissance and the Reformation. So what I want you to particularly zero in on for the purposes of our lectures is this one here, part 3 or book 3 by N.R. Needham, 2,000 Years of Christ's Power, Renaissance and the Reformation. You should be particular with that one. So there are actually 3 volumes, but the volume that I want you to have for the purposes of our lectures is volume 3 or book 3 by N.R. Needham. Now I'm going to now descend into, before that actually, let me just recommend another voluminous book. Now that's at the bottom there, if you can see it. At the bottom there, you have a book called D'Aubigné's History of the Reformation. It's another voluminous one. And they're not very easily written, very, very small font. There we go. All right, very, very, very small font. And then again, this is not a very easy read, I should warn you, both in terms of the language as well as the volume of it. Very intimidating. But again, many people do think D'Aubigné has done an excellent work in terms of capturing the Reformation as a historical event and historical process. So it's called D'Aubigné's History of the Reformation. I think this is a Frenchman, if I'm not wrong. D'Aubigné's History of the Reformation. That's another voluminous one. So I am done recommending the voluminous ones. We will just set them aside there. We can breathe and be happy that we're done with them. If you are able, you can buy them. You can find them. But if you're not able as well, that's fine. I'm just going to then get into smaller and more manageable books. Now, the third one there, not quite the third one because I've recommended quite a number, but on the list there at the top, number 3, you have Sketches from Church History by Mr. S.M. Houghton. Mr. S.M. Houghton has written an excellent, brief, summary, concise actually, I think precise, very much to the point, history of the church. And he calls it Sketches because it's really sketchy. So this one we can read. And if you see it, it's written in very easy to follow manner. The writing is very nice. The pages are very good. And then they have pictures there. Pictures. So that helps us as well as we try to make sense of the events there. So he has a broad sweep in sketchy form of church history there. And he calls it Sketches from Church History. It's by S.M. Houghton. You've got that there going. The early church to the rise of Islam is where he begins. And he ends it to the 19th century, the century church on the continent of Europe, and so on and so forth. So there you are. You've got S.M. Houghton there. Sketches from Church History. Another excellent. This one I'll recommend wholeheartedly to every category. Even if you're a lazy reader, this one will be good for you. If you're a reader who likes pictures, this one is going to be very, very good for you. So Sketches from Church History is another one. Then another one that is really polemical, actually. Really, really polemical. And but I think it's really good to sort of give you a handle on Roman Catholicism, what it teaches and what they believe in and where they deviate and depart from Orthodox Christian faith. Mr. Herbert M. Carson has written a book called The Faith of the Vatican. The Faith of the Vatican. The Faith of the Vatican. The Faith of the Vatican is a book written by Mr. Herbert M. Carson, A Fresh Look at Roman Catholicism. So that's a polemical one, and it's going to be nice to look at that so that you just have a history there and a better handle on Roman Catholicism. But before I recommend the other one, there's one that I haven't actually written there, and I'm just going to recommend it to you. Far from Rome and Near to God. Far from Rome and Near to God is another book that I think I ought to recommend to you. Far from Rome and Near to God. And it's personal testimonies of 50 converted Roman Catholic priests. Personal testimonies of 50 converted Roman Catholic priests. Richard Burnett, our brother who went to be with the Lord recently, and Martin Buckingham, and Mr. Richard Burnett are the editors of this particular book. Having done that, we're coming back to our list there, and at number 5, you have a book that I love with all my heart. I love this. I love this book. It's by Michael Reeves. Michael Reeves, The Unquenchable Flame, introducing the Reformation. So obviously, he will be very simple because he's making an introduction to the Reformation. Even people that have never been familiar with that history will be able to benefit from our brother Michael Reeves here, The Unquenchable Flame. Wonderful. He's very warm. He's very devotional. He's very simple. He's very easy to follow. And he also has pictures throughout the book. And he has very practical applications there. And I think his titles are rather intriguing. For example, in chapter 3, he has this title, Soldiers, Sausages, and Revolution. And this is a nice thing. And he's going to be talking about that Reformation in Switzerland under Ulrich Zwingli. And there was a conversation around sausages. Can Christians eat sausage? Of course, it's connected to Lent, which is a Catholic sort of a thing there. And, not eating meat and so on. And Zwingli, after the Reformation, says, don't put us into this regulations and stuff. And Unquenchable Flame, Michael Reeves, wonderful. By the way, next to it is another one written by Michael Reeves and Tim Chester. Michael Reeves and Tim Chester. They have both written a book that they are calling Why the Reformation Still Matters. Why the Reformation Still Matters. And I think I actually do have as well some kind of DVD series as well. I'm not sure I have them near me now. But I also have some, they are also available in DVD series. I think you can buy them as an audiobook as well. Why the Reformation Still Matters. You can buy that as audiobooks. I don't have it here. Again, it was borrowed, never been returned here. Why the Reformation Still Matters. I think if you get that book, which I've just recommended, please also try and get Why the Reformation Still Matters. Why today we must think about the Protestant Reformation and why we must look at it in that regard. Then the book that I've read at the beginning of my lecture here, The Greatest Century of Reformation. The Greatest Century of Reformation, written by Peter Hammond. The Greatest Century of Reformation, written by Peter Hammond. I think this is an excellent book. Really good. Really good. Got colored maps there, if you can see. Maps where the Reformation started and how it spread, and so on and so forth. He has those wonderful illustrations. This has got lots of pictures in it, and it's a lovely laid out book, as well as very colorful. And I think it just does help, when we write books, we must not make them as boring as possible, Let us try to make them as palatable and as consumable as possible. And I think Mr. Peter Hammond here helps us with that, and you will enjoy reading that. Not just beautiful outside, but I think it has excellent treatment in terms of summary forms of the Reformation and that century where God moved tremendously. He's got many things to say there. So Peter Hammond, The Greatest Century of the Reformation. All right, then you've got Andrew Cook, The Reformation, A Sound Bite History. It's a little book, very little one. I bought this book when I was in South Africa preaching at the African Pastors Conference, and I found this and I thought it would be so useful to those young people in our church, as well as those that come to our library who just want to have an introduction, a soundbite. It's a very small one, very small book, very small. Soundbite history, gives you history in soundbite so that you have an overview there. So you've got this one here by Andrew Cook, The Reformation, a soundbite history. That's another one. And then next to it, again, Michael Reeves. Oh boy, don't we love Michael Reeves? I think this was in 2017. Michael Reeves wrote this one in 2017, I should suggest. This was the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation, and of course the book is called the booklet, I should say, maybe not a booklet, but it's a very small one here. Again, very colorful and very well illustrated. Freedom Movement. Freedom Movement. That's what he calls the Reformation. Freedom Movement. 500 years of Reformation. And our brother Michael Reeves I will be quoting from these ones throughout our lectures together here. So that's wonderful. The other ones that I'm going to recommend are really more like novels. Well, not novels, like biographies and autobiographies. Here's one by Roland Bainton, Here I Stand, the classic biography of Martin Luther. Here I Stand, the classic biography of Martin Luther. Here by Mr. Roland Bainton. And there's another one here, Martin Luther, just Martin Luther. Another story of Martin Luther here that you can find by Estelle Rose. Estelle Rose, just Martin Luther. Estelle Rose there. And so on and so forth. So that is the layout of the course as we should have it going towards. And as I said, these things will be scrolling at the bottom of your screen starting now. As you can see, they're already beginning to scroll there. William Cunningham, number 2, 2000 Years of Church History. If you see at the bottom of your screen, there is that scrolling text there. It tells you these books that we are recommending to you. So this is going to be useful to you, and so on and so forth. So then I want you to tell somebody who knows somebody that we will be doing this from tomorrow and onwards, the Lord giving us grace. And I think it will be very useful, very warm, and I hope we can apply it practically as we look at churches around us. Have we fallen back to Rome? Have we lost Protestant heritage? And so on and so forth. May the Lord bless you. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for keeping me company. I hope this live stream has come to you loud and clear. Please drop me a message, text me there. Tell me that you received the audio as well as those illustrations. The scrolling text is visible. Should we do it better? That shared screen there, the Word document with the recommended resources, was that legible to you? Could you read it? Please let me know that you are able to do that, because I'll be doing these interactive screens. Hopefully I can do that as we move along, and the Lord giving us that grace. This is going to be hugely profitable. I'm excited about this. Actually, I think one of the most significant lectures that I've done online, this is probably going to be the most significant one in my view, in my estimation, and that's probably because I'm passionate about church history, as our brother Barnabas said last week in those wonderful lectures that he carried us through, the 5 points of Calvinism, the doctrines of grace. And by the way, just to tell you then, the reason why I thought we should do this was to dovetail what our brother Barnabas was doing, I think 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago. I think this particular one is going to be very nice to dovetail with those particular lectures. So find some time, tell somebody who knows somebody that we're meeting here tomorrow at 9:30 p.m. East African time, day after tomorrow as well, and the next week like that. So until I meet you here tomorrow, may the Lord bless you and may the Lord keep you until I see you again. Bye-bye for now.